Now, I am joined by Zanaco's Chief Risk Officer, Mr. Mutisunge Zulu. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Financial Insights.
Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you. So you were on a panel discussion. Kindly break it down for us. What are some of the key insights that you brought out on the panel discussion that the general public can really just take home with?
Thank you so much. So coming from the banking sector, I mean, I work for Zanaco. It's the largest bank in Zambia by asset size. We have a very, very mammoth task, like from the financing perspective. So we're discussing sustainability and climate change. So the question is, climate change has come, then what's the role that any bank would sort of play? What's the role that Zanaco plays in this whole thing? So first of all, we start with the financing aspect, but then it's shaping risk appetite. How we categorize the sectors that we then extend credit to. For example, right now, climate change has affected energy. We have an energy deficit of 950 megawatts. It's hitting corporates, it's hitting the retail sector as well. So you would expect that banks would then respond by, say, providing solutions to the retail sector, getting people to decongest off the grid and having solar solutions sustainable, within their households. That's number one, so they can focus on getting their lives. From a corporate perspective as well, we do believe that when you talk about corporate, businesses between the retail and the large corporates as well, you have your small, medium-sized businesses as well that are bearing the brunt of this energy issue. And we as the bank also come in through our asset finance and provide these solutions. That's for retail, for corporates, and for the small, medium-sized businesses. If you go to the agri sector, you would see that it hasn't rained much. So in terms of crop output, you expect that 56% of the crop that was planted has been damaged as well. There are initiatives that have come up, such as your irrigation, winter irrigation. There's the winter crop as well. Inputs have to be, sort of provided. And the bank also plays a very, very key part in there, because if the banks don't lend, then it's going to be very difficult for our farmers, and then food security risks will continue exacerbating. I think one thing that came out of the discussion is that this climate discussion in terms of financing is something that is new and is at infancy, and we need to embrace it. But then as we are embracing it, we mustn't then forget that we are coming from a space where, yes, we have, your traditional lending, and then you now have specialized type of lending, and then that's the financial innovation aspect as well. So that financial innovation means that thinking critically and saying, can we develop a pool of these special funds at affordable rates? I think the biggest challenge in Africa has been that interest rates have been very much elevated because of a number of reasons. It can be your fiscal posture and all that. So the question is, what have banks done to ensure that they can continue to lend but affordable prices? I would speak for Zanaco to say that our financial innovation has gone and seen us do partnerships with institutions like your BII, that's your British International Investment, the IFC, that's for risk sharing purposes, and at the same time there's been insurance entities that we've dealt with, the likes of TD, AGF as well, that make it attractive for banks to want to take risk, on SMEs, on players, with the expectation that in the event of default, we are then allowed to recover all that. So I'd say the cake is big. Zambia has, I think, in excess of 17 commercial banks, and you can imagine if every bank was doing what it should do, then I think that we are in good stead to come and, address this issue.
So talking about the issues of climate change, Mr. Zulu, why do you feel that it is actually very, very important for the EAZ to really come up with this summit, most especially to be able to really tackle the issue of climate change and also some of the effects that it has had on the Zambian economy? Why do you feel it's important that the EAZ actually came up with this conference?
So I'll mention something. I'm actually the former National Secretary for Economics Association of Zambia, and the current administration is doing a great job. Yes, I will tell you in one line, it's policy advocacy. You need someone that will call out the private sector, will call out the public sector if they are not doing something right. Yes. Someone needs to speak, and that's the voice, and that's the role that the EAZ plays. To bring the IMF resident representative, to bring representatives from World Bank, and to bring in all the private sector players, including the banks as well, is something that is not easy. But I believe that the takeaways from this summit need to be acted upon if we are to get any tangible fruits out of this, which I believe we will. It is very important. The policy advocacy role is one that is very much downplayed, but EAZ has got access to those high offices where decisions are made, EAZ has a seat at the table when people are making decisions, and that is why they need to be supported in every faculty. I would tell you one thing that I learned on the job when I was National Secretary. We would have a private sector on one end, we would have the public sector. The public sector, these are people that were policy makers and were making decisions, but guess what? There was no one in between, and we had access to offices. So we would liaise with the private sector and go with them. But you know what? I have seen an improvement in how this has all changed. If you look at what the PPD is doing, now you have your private sector and the public sector that now sit together, and that's what this country has lacked. When you talk, you will understand what each other's sticky points are, and then we can then all have a mindset of driving one economy going forward. So that will be my contribution to your question.
Sir. Anything in closing, anything else that you really love to bring out, especially from the conference or just from like a personal perspective, anything else that you really love to bring out?
Okay, I think the most important thing is I think that if all banks in Zambia could come and be GCF accredited, it would be very important in accessing monies. I'll send a shout out to the Central Bank. I think they're doing a great job. But at the same time, I'll look at the Securities and Exchange Commission to say, I believe that there's more that we can do. I know that they've done all those guidelines and all, but I think we now need to start measuring progress by the number of green bonds we are seeing, number of would like to see ETFs trade on our exchanges, would like to see more activity on the Lusaka Stock Exchange. I would like to see more pension funds, committing funds to some of these initiatives. There's no way you can issue a green bond and pension funds don't take part when they are the pools of funds. I would like to see more insurance companies because the liquidity is there. It's just that there's this risk aspect, perceived risk that pretty much needs to change. So I believe that we have everything that we need to turn around this economy. So I think those would be my words. And thank you so much for Financial Insights. You guys are doing a great job. And look, I think thanks for hosting me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much also for making time. We really, really do appreciate. Okay, so you've just gotten off a panel discussion. You also gave a presentation, sir. So just briefly highlight some of the key take-homes that we can go with as the general public out there.
So it was a long presentation. I'm going to try to summarize those main key points. But essentially, we went through first the original situation from where the IMF program started, right? Looking at, the past history of heavy debt issuances and the lack of growth that materialized from those heavy debt-filled public investment, which ultimately, after COVID, led Zambia to default on its debts. So we discussed about how the IMF program came about, which is essentially the government's program reform under the 8th National Development Plan, which is supported by the IMF. And it has essentially three main pillars. One is, of course, we had to restore debt sustainability. And so this went through a debt restructuring under the G20 Common Framework. But of course, with debt restructuring, we needed to ensure that we had fiscal consolidation through higher revenue and also rationalizing some of the past ineffective expenditures while we improve public finance management to ensure that the budget of the government is effectively being used. The second pillar was, of course, to increase social spending, right? So the IMF program was designed with a floor for social spending, making sure that the allocation on the budget is not going below the target. And in fact, under the IMF program, social spending has more than doubled as a share of GDP. So we started at 0.7% in 2020, and we are now aiming to reach 2.3% of GDP in 2024. And the third pillar was obviously on the governance aspect, and so ensuring that, we promote accountability and transparency in Zambia through different reforms. One was on, helping the authorities implement the Public Debt Management Act, which ensured that any new debt contracted by the government is approved by the parliament, so that we avoid repeating mistakes from the past. Other important reforms are, about the Access to Information Bill, which has been put into a commencement order recently in June by the Ministry of Information. And other reforms are more around the recommendation that has been given under the Public Governance Diagnostic that Zambia undertook with the IMF early 2023. So we went through the different objectives of the programs, and essentially we focused on the first part, which is about restoring fiscal sustainability to ensure that Zambia debt sustainability recovers, right? And this went through a long journey. We recently had a lot of positive announcements with the successful exchange of Eurobonds in June against 2 new bonds with much lower debt services. That has then triggered a wave of rating upgrade from credit rating agency, which ultimately should unleash more capital available for the private sector and lower the cost of that financing for the private sector. But more needs to be done, right? Like we need to reach now an agreement in principle with private commercial creditors, and then we'll have the fourth review of the IMF program in October 2024. We recently successfully completed the review of the third review under the IMF program. This has unleashed a 30% quota augmentation for Zambia, which is a great news, meaning that a lot of additional financing was released under that third review to support Zambia through the droughts.
So as the IMF representative, sir, how optimistic are you about Zambia in general and also Zambia's economy?
Well, I think, 2024, unfortunately, we had the drought, right? This has impacted the recovery, but we see this as a temporary shock. And ultimately, in 2025 and 2026, if the reforms that the government are currently trying to implement are successfully implemented, growth will recover, right, at much higher pace for 2025 because we have the base effect from 2024, and then going forward we continue to grow. This is supported by very high copper prices, which are promoting investment in the mining sectors, right? Now, on the energy side, we currently have the El Nino. We expect to have the El Nina effect, which is the opposite. So we should have a lot of water coming towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, which should help alleviate some of the energy crisis as well. So we see this current shock as temporary, with 2025 and 2026 being supported by high copper price, investment in the mining sector, with other minerals as well coming on board. But it will be very important to implement reforms and progress on reform implementation so that the economy can diversify itself as well out of mining sector into the agricultural sector, the agribusiness sector, for example, making sure that reforms such as the e-venture reform, which is trying to promote participation of the private sector in the farming input supply, is being properly implemented to give the choice to farmers and ensure that there is more private sector activity in that area as well. So I think overall, the growth projections are optimistic. I think, the business climate should and will need to continue to improve. But going forward, it will also be very important to ensure that we remove existing distortion for the private sector and that we avoid creating new distortions that could create more concerns for private investors to invest in Zambia's future.
Yes, sir. Thank you so very much. That was really, really an insightful explanation that you gave, and we really do appreciate you joining us on Financial Insights. Thank you.
My pleasure, Zikomo.
Zikomo nice. So you just recently had a presentation at the EAZ conference that is being held at Ciela. So just kindly break it down for us. What are some of the key take-homes that we can really pick up from the presentation that you gave?
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, we are participating in this year's Summit, ZRA, as part of our strategy to ensure that we provide taxpayer education to members of the public. When you look at our corporate strategic plan, one of the key strategic pillars is collaboration and customer focus, where we want to engage as much as possible with members of the public, provide them with information that they need, and then we also receive feedback from them in terms of the services that we provide as Zambia Revenue Authority. So in the context of this EAZ Summit, as you saw from the initial presentations, I think one underlying theme that comes out is that as a country, we need to enhance our domestic revenue mobilization. We cannot continue relying on borrowing to support, for example, sustaining our climate change activities. We can not rely on borrowing to support our national budget. So we have to look inward in terms of domestic revenue mobilization. And that's why we come in as ZRA. And our key emphasis has been that our current levels of compliance are very low as a country. You saw the figures there I was sharing. Look at the first half of this year, only 777 taxpayers, 0.1%, accounted for 80% of our collection. Where are the rest? And that's an area that we need to look at, driving compliance as a country. We need to make sure that everyone in their own way contribute to the national treasury. And these are issues that we need to deal with. We're also looking at comparatively, what we're asking for is not something that other countries have not done. When you look at revenue to GDP, we are below 20%. There are countries within Africa that are beyond 20%. And if you look at the medium-term budget plan, government wants to go to as high as 21%. And it's achievable as a country for us to reach that. But we need to do with compliance, making sure everyone comes on board, they are contributing their fair share so that we're able to enhance domestic revenue mobilization. For me, this is a key takeaway. Let's enhance domestic revenue mobilization. Let's generate our own resources to support the budget. We're at 70% this year. That's what is expected in terms of contribution to the budget. Other countries, I was talking to my counterparts from South Africa, they're at 90%.
Yes, sir.
So we can do much more as a country in terms of revenue mobilization.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So this conference, Commissioner, sir, brings together different delegates from different walks of life, especially in Zambia. Others are representing policy-making organizations. So why do you, as ZRA, feel that it is important for the Economics Association of Zambia to really come up with this conference that brings together different people from different organizations? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Economics Association of Zambia is the anchor institution in terms of affairs of economics of the nation. When we talk about tax, at the center of it all is economics. So it's very important that we have platforms such as this one where stakeholders are brought together to debate issues relating to our economy and the various aspects. Oftentimes we leave very important discussions, I'm not against social media, but we leave them to social media rather than bringing stakeholders to such platforms where we can have, more refined intellectual discourse to look at what is exactly happening.
Yes.
If there's a debate around tax policy of this kind, and what is the data showing us? How are we comparing with other countries? How can we make it better as our country? Are we doing better or worse off? And so we should have such platforms where all stakeholders are brought on board and we're able to debate and discuss these issues based on empirical data, based on real refined research, rather than just speculative dialogue.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So any last message, Commissioner, sir, that you have to the general public out there, and anything else that you would really love to communicate to the people of Zambia?
Well, what I can say is that as Zambia Revenue Authority, we are open for discussion, we're open for dialogue with all stakeholders. If you are having tax challenges, don't run away from ZRA. Come to ZRA, where human beings will reason and work with you in terms of how best can we make sure that, one, you remain sustainable as a business, continue operating, but two, we also contribute to the national treasury while all this is going on. So please, people should feel free to engage ZRA. And we have a team that is present here to make sure that they provide any taxpayer education that may be required.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for joining us on Financial Insights.
Okay, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're still bringing you more insights right here on Financial Insights. Now I am joined by Dr. Oswald Mungule, who is the EAZ president. Sir, thank you so very much for joining us on Financial Insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So this year's conference theme is Navigating Zambia's Sustainable Economic Transformation. What really inspired the theme, sir, for this year?
The theme for this year was inspired by the declaration of the drought situation as a disaster by the president in February 2024. So as an Economics Association of Zambia, we then thought we could look at how the country can progress, given that these situations will be occurring every after year.
Yes, sir.
So it's not the last time that we're going to have the drought situation. And next time we may have the flood situation, or we may have very extreme cold situations. So then we looked at our economy and said, are we resilient?
Yes,
then we said, maybe we may not be resilient, and therefore we need to come up with some discussion theme as an Economics Association of Zambia. And then we also looked at what other problems could actually trigger disaster for the country. And that's a debt. If a country is heavily indebted, then it becomes a problem. And then if you have the drought, which also compounds the problem, the economic problem, and then you have the debt, then it becomes a challenge for a country to come out of that situation. So we are navigating Zambia's economic progress by looking at two things.
Yes.
So one is the climate change issue, and then the other part is how do we transform the debt that government has into cheaper debt. How can government refinance the expensive debt for a cheaper debt so that the debt situation is more sustainable. Sustainability means the debt that government has is able to make government even to spend more. Government will not be constrained in spending.
Yes, sir.
So if government is constrained in spending, it's a problem for the country. Because government expenditure is a driver of business environment. Because every business person wants to get contracts from government and to do their business, especially in developing world. We haven't reached that stage where the private sector drives expenditure in an economy. In these parts of the world, it's the governments normally that are driving. And if government is not spending, then you can see that there won't be any economic activity and everyone will be suffering. So we don't want to have a situation where government is constrained. So debt sustainability is important. And the drought can actually cause government to tighten the belt. And then by tightening, when government is tightening, it's like it's squeezing the economy. And everyone will start feeling the hardships. So that's what this summit is all about. We're going to come up with solutions or recommendations in terms of economic policies.
Yes, sir.
And also to see how the private sector can actually go about implementing some of these solutions so that we're going to do. So we have the research unit in the Economics Association of Zambia, which is going to be in the forefront, trying to engage these stakeholders like the Zambia Revenue Authority in terms of revenue mobilization. Then we also look at the government sector, like the Minister of Green Economy and Environment, Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Minister of Finance. These are our partners that we're going to structure some research so that we provide that information then that information will be provided to the people of Zambia.
What are some of the key take-homes from some of the presentations that were given today by different people? So what are your highlights? Like, oh, let's really bring out that, let's really bring out that.
So it's very interesting if you actually look at the presentations that were given. Firstly, there was a presentation by the IMF in terms of where it sees where the country is. And the key takeaway that you do find from the IMF's presentation is that they're asking that the country should increase its capacity for domestic resource mobilization to be able to raise revenue from the domestic market in terms of having to drive our economic recovery. ZRI had a very interesting one, which was speaking to how low the compliance levels are in the country. Very interesting aspect that there are 245 large organizations in the country that contribute 77% to our GDP, and that the 90,000 SMEs that are registered under Zambia Revenue Authority only contribute 22%. It is a very, very interesting statistic for which should help us to be able to look at these metrics to determine what is the best strategy that we must be taking. Because obviously with 90,000 SMEs that they must be contributing more to the GDP than the 245. But also they spoke about how low the compliance issues are in all the sectors. One of the very interesting ones is that we have got 6,000 registered mining entities in the country, but 80% of the tax that they receive comes from 6 mines. So which is also speaking to how bad our structures are in having to ensure that we are collecting the revenue that is required for the country.
Yes, sir.
And this is a very cardinal issue, that we've got very simple strategies that we need to put in place to be able to speak to having to improve revenue base. The last one was by Bank of Zambia. And the interesting aspect around this presentation was always speaking to the fact that we have seen this cyclical occurrence of the drought in the country, and that the regularity with which it is coming is actually increasing, that there are less years between each time that we have a drought. And they presented statistics from 1987 up until now to 2024. And it is important that we should have learned from these challenges that we are facing, that the issues around climate change is here to stay, and we need to be able to put in place strategies that are speaking to the country's resilience to be able to absorb these external shocks.
Yes, sir. So this year's theme, sir, is navigating Zambia's sustainable economic transformation, which were also the Economics Association of Zambia is also integrating climate change adaptation. Of course, we can all agree that the issue of climate change has really hit the country badly, because a lot of sectors have really been affected, especially the fact that you brought out the issue of the energy sector. So how optimistic are you as an economist, sir, that we will really get out of this as a country and things would really get back to normal? What should the country and Zambia at large be looking forward to in a broader perspective?
Optimistic we must be that we should be able to get out of this, but we must also be realistic about where we are. The first aspect in terms of being able to get out of this is that the economy must be strong enough to be able to absorb the shocks of, say, climate change, which has come in place. At the moment, the economy is at a very weak position, and it is not growing. So essentially is that it is also very difficult for us to be able to deal with the mitigating issues around climate change, because the position is just gotten worse with the drought, because of the fact that we haven't created a resilient economy. So the first aspect that we must be able to do to be able to address this is to be able to build the resilience of our economy. Our economy must be growing in terms of its GDP. That GDP must be strong enough for us to have the reserves, to have the resources to be able to deal with mitigating factors. What you will find now is that climate change has brought around issues around deficit of power generation. If our economy was resilient, we would have the resources to be able to either purchase additional power to be imported into the country, or quickly implement strategies that construct alternative energy sources to be able to deal with it immediately. And we have not been able to do either of these two because the economy is not strong enough. So it is important that as a country we put a strategy that is speaking to actually strengthening our economy.
Mr. Hambayi, any last message that you have to the people of Zambia, or anything else that you would really love to bring out right here at this conference?
So the key aspect I think that we must be thinking about is the issue of having to grow our economy. This is the ultimate solution for our country, is that the economy must grow, and that is a measure of the GDP. If you're talking about the GDP, is that we must be thinking about having to have a double-digit GDP growth. When we do have a double-digit GDP growth, it is the one that is going to address three cardinal issues that we do have as a country. The first one is unemployment, the second one is the high cost of living, and the third one is the issue of poverty. Is that 60% of the population lives below the poverty line, and we need to be able to address this to start to think that everybody can contribute to economic growth.
Yes, sir.